So as you have guessed, probably, well, from what I said, our topic this morning is joy. And by the way, this is going to be a shorter sermon, so that might be something that causes you joy as well, since we had the children's program this morning. And of course, joy is a word that we use in church a lot, but oftentimes the words that we use in church the meaning of them is sometimes a little bit fuzzy to us. And so we have to ask ourselves, what do we mean when we say joy? Is joy the same thing as happiness? Are they, synonyms? Well, I would say that happiness is a positive emotion that we have in response to a favorable circumstance. So, for instance, if on Friday night the gold miners win their game against the Timmins Rock, I would dare say that Jim will probably be happy. But if in Jim's excitement he got driving a little too fast on the road home and slipped off the road and into the ditch, I would suspect that his happiness would be gone. So happiness is fleeting. Joy, on the other hand, is similar to happiness in the sense that it is this positive emotion. But joy is an outlook rather than a response to our circumstances. To use the driving analogies again, if I am driving a little too fast on the road and I suddenly see lights turn on behind me, chances are I'm not happy, but I can still be joyful. So how can I be joyful? Miserable people want to know. One school of thought might be that I can take an inventory of all of the things that make me thankful. I can think, what are the things that God has blessed me with? I have freedom. I have health. I have employment. I have a family. And all of these different things are things that I can be thankful for. And if I am thankful, that will bring me joy. And gratitude is definitely something that we should cultivate as a spiritual discipline. I'm not trying to put any shade on that, but what I would say is those things that we are thankful for are often things that can be taken away from us. Think of the story of Job. Can a person who has no finances, no future, no family, no loved ones, no friends, can they experience joy? Well, I think joy comes from something that can't be taken away from us. And in this world, those things are few and far between. Everything seems unpredictable. Everything seems to change so fast. Even what we perceive to be permanent, what we perceive to be something that can't be moved, often is. When I was a kid, we were in the Cold War. And we lived in fear of the Soviet Union that was like the first or second, depending on what you suspected, most powerful country on earth. And that was 35 years ago, and it's been gone for 30 years. It disappeared in the metaphorical blink of an eye. Now, I doubt that too many people miss the old days of the Soviet Union, but I think it's illustrative of a point that even the things that seem to be a given in our own world are sometimes on the brink of being removed. It's very hard to find things that can't change or can't be taken away from us. Now, as Christians, I think that we can take joy in this idea that God has loving intentions towards us and has the power to bring those intentions to their end. In other words, that God is for us. And of course, when we look at the Christmas story, this idea that God is for us is not necessarily a settled question for Israel. See, Israel's history is one where they had God deliver them powerfully from slavery in the land of Egypt. He made them into a people. He brings them into this land that he's promised to give their ancestors. and tells them, I will be your God and you will be my people. He makes a covenant with them, an agreement, and gives them the laws. He says, I want you all to flourish, and so I'm going to tell you, these are the rules, and if you live by them, you'll flourish together. But the people break those laws. And they continue to break the laws. And God sends prophets to warn them. This isn't the way you're supposed to go. Turn back. Go the way that God instructed you, and things will be okay. But the people continue to sin. And so God has to allow them, rather than enabling them to continue in this way, has to allow them to face the consequences of their actions. And so they're carted off as slaves to foreigners. And while the people are allowed to return back to the land that they were taken away from, they remain enslaved to foreigners. Israel becomes a client of a series of pagan rulers over them. They're ruled over by the Babylonians, then by the Syrians, then by the Greeks, then by the Egyptians and the Syrians again, and then they're ruled over by the Romans. And all of these are pagans. And so they have this question among themselves: did we break God's covenant so badly that he has washed his hands of us and has walked away? Because he would be within his rights to do so. But on this night, a baby comes in a manger. It's not something that we would see as a earth-changing event, but it is. Because at this moment, God is showing us that this promised redemption, this plan that he had from the beginning, is still on track. That our disobedience has not derailed God's plan, that his intentions towards us are still good. Paul, writing to his protege, Timothy, puts it this way: if we are unfaithful, he remains faithful, for he cannot deny who he is. In other words, God's commitment to the promises that he has made to his people is not dependent upon whether the people are obedient. Instead, it's dependent on the character of God. It is completely alien to who he is to not be faithful to the things that he has promised. And so God can be our constant and can bring us great joy. I'm reminded of the story of Simeon. So Simeon is a man who God has revealed to him that he won't die until he sees his messianic king. And so when Mary and Joseph have Jesus, they're required by the law to bring Jesus to the temple to be dedicated, as all firstborn sons are. And when they go to the temple, the Spirit leads Simeon to go also to the temple. And when he sees baby Jesus, the Holy Spirit reveals Jesus' identity to Simeon. And in Luke 2:27-32, we read, so when Mary and Joseph came to present the baby Jesus to the Lord, as the law required, Simeon was there. He took the child in his arms and praised God, saying, Sovereign Lord, now let your servant die in peace as you have promised. I have seen your salvation, which you have prepared for all people. He is a light to reveal God to the nations, and he is the glory of your people, Israel. You see, Simeon experiences joy because he sees in Jesus God's unalterable commitment to his people. Now, notice that the text doesn't say that Simeon saw Jesus' ministry, death, and resurrection. He merely sees the baby Jesus. And we can assume that he probably dies shortly after. Now, the text doesn't say he's an old man, but let me just say, if God said to me, Peter, you will not die until the Maple Leafs win the Stanley Cup, and they win this season, I'm not going to be very happy about that, am I? So Simeon seems to be a person who's been around long enough that he's comfortable with this idea that he will soon pass away, but now he has seen God's king. And the reason that he takes joy in this is because while he has just seen baby Jesus, he knows that that he's seen God's intention to make good on his promise, and that he trusts in God's power to then bring it to its completion. Now, we live in a different time. Jesus is not just God incarnate, he's also the crucified and risen one. But at the same time, I think we share an experience with Simeon, in the sense that God has promised to make all things right. And while at the cross and at the resurrection, God has defeated the power of evil, that new kingdom that he inaugurated has not yet come to full bloom. Our world is broken. People hurt. We hurt. But we have seen that God has gone all in on this rescue plan. He sent Jesus. He sent himself, the only thing that could cost him everything. And so we see that he is fully committed to this strategy of making things right in this world. And so while we live in a time when things are not yet right, we see that God's intentions are to make it right. And we believe in his power to bring those intentions to their end. And so we know that God is powerful and God is for us. And I think that is the constant that we can hold on to, and the thing that from which we can receive great joy.